welcome to another edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallen. Well, today we're going to take a look at the energy lay of the land. We are still waiting, of course, for the details of what these mega projects might be and energy or infrastructure, although there seems to be a consensus that ports will be the primary issue. Churchill, Montreal, maybe some updates on the East Coast. And the government has proceeded to open or to name the head of the Special Projects Office, and it will be based in Calgary. So that will be good news for the energy sector as well. But as long as the trade troubles continue, it is even more important that we start to see some movement on these mega projects to actually spur the economy and, of course, create jobs, because the impact of the trade troubles may last for quite a while. So I don't know how much ground we'll be able to cover, but we have the expert with us today, Heather Exner-Pirot. She's a senior fellow and director of Energy, Natural Resources, and the Environment at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, and she's a special advisor to the Business Council of Canada and a string of other things. But why don't we just jump in? One of the things, and it kind of surprises me whenever you hear the Prime Minister or the Energy Minister talk about or make an announcement of some description, there's always almost this surprise in their voice, like, we have all this energy in Canada. It has been what people have been saying to them for a very long time. This is our strong suit. Yes, we could be the superpower. Let's get at it. What do you make of going first on the ports? Is that the right strategy?
Yeah, so we got some more details with the Prime Minister and his Energy Minister, Tim Hodgson, in Berlin. Interesting and fascinating for one that's who he took with him. Obviously, very telling. And the Prime Minister alluded when asked, how are you actually going to move things forward? How are you actually going to get, energy to Germany? And alluded that we were going to make some moves on the port of Churchill first and the port of Montreal, that those would likely be amongst the major projects that are announced. So, I've said this many times, but the oil and gas CEOs have not been coy about what they need to attract investment, to have regain some confidence in the Canadian investment landscape. They had their list of 6, recommendations. Of course, Premier Smith had her list, a little bit longer list, a bit more political, but much overlap. And we haven't seen any movement on those. So no one's list, no oil and gas CEO asked to be able to ship LNG out of Churchill. There's obviously some huge restrictions to the port of Churchill. It is not going to be the thing that drives our economy or drives diversification of exports, but obviously seems to be in political favor.
So let's just unpack that a little bit, because it was kind of ironic that these announcements, at least the initial part, were made in Germany, and it took a German reporter to kind of point out the obvious, which is, we already asked you for this. You said there was no business case. You seem to be changing your mind on that, but how are you going to get it here? I mean, honestly, if we're going to do a pivot to Europe, that's got to be predicated on a willingness and an ability to get stuff out of the ground and then move it to the customer. So they seem to be asking that obvious question.
So there's so much to unpack here, Pamela. I'll unpack a little bit, but I'm sure there's more to unpack. One thing is the change in tone. That here you have very explicitly the new Energy Minister, Tim Hodgson, saying the last government did these bad things and we're going to do new good things. And of course, that last government was also a Liberal government. So you have the peculiar case of a Liberal minister calling out the former Liberal government, which for many of us, is very good. Yeah. We totally agree, but is peculiar anyways. Pragmatism seems to be hitting. Then just that this is exactly almost 3 years to the day of when Chancellor Scholz came to Canada. And that was when, the famous "there's no business case" in LNG came out. And the government instead said, we will send you green hydrogen by 2025. And they did a joint declaration of intent back in 2022 to say, we commit to sending green hydrogen by 2025 to address Germany's energy security issues.
I
Obviously,
think
that's
we
not.
just had a re-announcement of that, didn't we?
So now we have a new JDI, a new declaration of intent on totally other issues. And in fact, and I looked for it, the 2022 JDI has been scrubbed from the government website. And of course, there will be no green hydrogen exports from Canada to Germany. There is not even FIDs on green hydrogen. It was obviously always a
Okay,
wild
you're
goose chase.
talking alphabet soup there, so
That's the
just
joint declaration. So just the
right.
agreement between Canada and Germany. Anyways, so that has all fallen apart. It's been exposed, as this wild goose chase. Now we're back to reality of Germany wondering if we're going to get LNG. Now, will Germany get LNG for Canada? On the one hand, they do get. There are Europeans are importing Canadian LNG. How do they do that? Via the Gulf of Mexico, via the United States. So it ends up looking like it's American LNG, but it's Canadian molecules traveling 6,000 kilometers south, getting exported through LNG terminals in the Gulf of Mexico, getting sent to Europe. So some LNG is getting sent to Europe, and some Canadian energy companies have made LNG deals with German companies like Uniper and Tourmaline only a month ago. So that's one thing. We are sending it to them, but via the United States. Now,
But sorry, can I just stop you there for a minute? Because what's we sell it to the US and at a reduced price, because this is what happens when you only have one market. You can't really bargain on price. And then the Americans actually resell it to the Germans at a higher price.
That is correct. So this foolishness, we will repainted
Yeah.
ourselves ideologically into this corner to say we can't sell it. There's no business case. And of course, private industry does what it does best and finds the business case, finds a way. There's obviously a market for it. And unfortunately, the Americans take a big piece of it.
Right.
So it's obviously very detrimental to our economy, but that's the situation. Now, what's interesting, and this is news, I think, that three of the West Coast LNG companies accompanied Hodgson, met with German counterparts, and in a piece yesterday in the Financial Post, and Hodgson spoke specifically to it. It looks like probably the best thing, the best real practical deal that you could make is for for German importers to do long-term contracts with Canadian LNG. And how will that work in practice? One's on the Pacific coast, one's on the Atlantic coast. The Germans or whoever will then trade that Canadian LNG for, either Qatari LNG or Russian LNG, unfortunately, whatever the LNG is. So whatever Japan was going to get from the Atlantic side or whatever, South Korea was going to get, they'll now switch it and trade it and get it from Canada. And what they were going to buy from the Atlantic side will go to Germany. So on paper, it'll look like, Germans are buying from Canada, but in reality, the molecules will be from somewhere else. But people can make money on this. You can get more LNG sold. So that looks like, a likely way of how we're going to get some deals on with the Germans.
It's such a crazy process to do, and we're so far behind. I mean, when Canada said there is no business case, I mean, the Americans just went to town and just built LNG ports and just started sending it west and east in every direction. We've put ourselves years, if not decades, behind this competition now. Fortunately, the world will continue to need this, and with people trying to at least put some distance between themselves and Russia, there's going to be an increased market. But how complicated and almost absurd to go through this song and dance to actually do what we should be doing as a powerful energy nation.
Well, then if you're wondering why our per capita GDP is lagging, if you're wondering why our productivity is lagging, it's exactly these self-defeating kind of policies, ideologically driven policies, real world out there. And at least one Liberal minister seems to be living in the real world with the rest of us.
Yeah. Okay. So LNG is going to be a valuable commodity, and we will figure out through these complicated routes and a little smoke and mirrors how to get it from the West Coast to markets and from the East Coast to markets. Is there something we should be doing physically right on the East Coast rather than Port of Montreal or Churchill? Wouldn't that be more effective?
So I do think so. So I am not, I've really, my background is Northern and Arctic development and Indigenous development.
Yes.
And so, yeah, so I hate to come out as a skeptic on Churchill, but Churchill has been around for 100 years,
Yeah.
and it has never been a large port. It was sustained in large part due to the wheat board monopoly. And in those decades that there was a wheat board monopoly that directed farmers' wheat to that port, as soon as
Yeah.
farmers ended the monopoly and people could choose where to send their wheat, they sent it elsewhere. Why is that? Churchill is a seasonal port. It has about a 3 to 4 month season. That makes it very expensive. You build infrastructure, but you can only use it for a third of the year. And it is, it is not very close to markets. You have to go through some complicated places. So I'm not a big fan of Churchill. There's maybe some business case for critical minerals because you can stockpile, you can produce minerals, stockpile it for 8 months and then ship it out later. You cannot do that with oil. And you cannot do that with natural gas. You can't just send it there for 8 months and then ship it out, come July. So I'm not a fan of Churchill for any of this at all. It doesn't make no business sense. And there's a lot of things that do make business sense. And God help us if we don't start there. But is there a business case for East Coast LNG? And I have to recall, and I'll never stop reminding the world, that in February 2022, as Russia was putting armaments onto the border with Ukraine, Guilbeault rejected Saguenay LNG. Rejected that 2 weeks before Russia invaded. But you could see what was happening. And previously, Quebec had already, yes, true, Quebec had also rejected that project. So both the Quebec and the federal government rejected it. The federal government articulated as, did not meet our Paris agreements, and it had some impact on some marine wildlife. And they had put the money in, and it was a good project. Now, why would anyone else keep going on an East Coast LNG project when the government just said, if it doesn't help us, if it emits carbon emissions, then we cannot support it. There's not going to be an LNG project that doesn't have an impact on our Paris agreement. And so that killed the business case for that project and any project that might want to come behind it. So now we're still waiting, about, the emissions cap. The emissions cap effectively precludes any LNG terminal. Some are going, despite it, waiting to get clarity.
So let's just explain that again. I really am trying to, because I'll tell you a little story. So I've spent the summer at home in Saskatchewan where people understand these issues because their family works in this industry, and if not that, agriculture, and sometimes both. So I was in a restaurant last night here in Toronto, and I heard the following conversation between two, grown-up gentlemen. Okay, that LNG and those critical minerals, we know they're dirty, but we should look and see if we have any of them. That was an actual conversation, and it just took me aback because I realize constantly how little people in this part of the world understand about what goes on in that other part of the world where the LNG and the oil and the other forms of gas and the critical minerals and the potash and the uranium really are. So this emissions cap, which was designed to stop emissions at the production point, at the extraction point, also ends up a more difficult way impacting the agriculture sector too. But explain what that means, because it's in that long list of bills that if we just got rid of them, it might help, as opposed to
top of the list. So we have an industrial carbon price, and I think it's $95 now that exists. On top of that, the government said, well, that's not enough. We're going to put an emissions cap on just the oil and gas sector in Canada. And we need them to meet our Paris Agreement commitments. We need them to cut their emissions by a range about 34, 35, 36% by 2030 from 2019 levels. And this is technically impossible to do without cutting production. And so this is why we think it's unconstitutional. They have no right to tell Alberta or Saskatchewan or BC to cut production. But anyways, makes it so, and they have draft regulations and they're impractical and they don't make sense and no one can make heads or tails of it. Not yet implemented, but sitting there as a monkey on everyone's back. Imagine having to go and say, okay, we all like LNG now. We want to get
Yeah.
Asian investors. We need them to put up 10 billion, 12 billion to do Silicim's LNG or to do LNG Canada phase 2. You go to your Asian investor, I would like to have billions of your dollars. And they say, what about this emissions cap? What does that mean for the project? Can my project go ahead? How much will it cost me? Will it reduce the production? There are no answers to that. And so we're having to go to these investors with our hand tied behind our back. Now, in the last 6 months with all of this, yes, the Liberals have become more bullish on LNG, and the BC NDP have become more bullish on NDP, and everyone's saying the right things. But we're all good for LNG. We're forgetting about the NG, the natural gas. You need natural gas to get LNG, and it's still extremely difficult to produce natural gas and extremely expensive for the producer. So something has to give here. You can't be building ports and you can't be promoting LNG and still make it impossible to produce anything that goes through a port or to produce the natural gas that has to go through an LNG liquefaction facility.
Okay, so here we are with the tanker ban still in place on the West Coast, the emissions cap, which, as you just explained, is actually a production cap. It's a disincentive to try and take things out of the ground, and then the Whopper Bill 69, which is this elaborate set of hoops that everybody must jump through in terms of consultations with everybody under the sun. And those are all still in place, even though we now have this special office set up to green light and study and assess new mega projects in the energy sector. So we're kind of doing this with one hand and then, making it impossible with the other.
Yes. So, and this is, so I am grateful and enthused by the change in tone. And we all see that the message is better and the rhetoric is better. And even Hodgson's remarks in Germany, I mean, I probably wouldn't have written anything differently. So very enthused by that. But the tack that they are taking to achieve, we want to be an energy superpower. How are we going to do that? The government is going to choose a handful of projects, and it's going to make it easier for those handful of projects. And we're going to focus on ports, and we're not going to focus on production. Like it's just like that will not achieve becoming an energy superpower. And why it's frustrating is because the industry, with some prodding, I will have to say from the Conservatives, for the first time in a long time, was very clear and did step up. Businesses, not just industry associations, businesses and CEOs stepped up and said, this is what needs to be done. And why have we not addressed any of those things that we said needed to be done? They're doing lots. It's not any of the things that the industry said needs to be done.
All right. The person that has taken over this special project, Dawn Fell, was in her most recent incarnation. The person managing TMX, the pipeline that the government bought, which they brag about in their own way and say, see here, we have done so much. It's almost at capacity. So there was also a question about whether or not one of the new projects would be expanding the capacity of TMX. There seems to be a lot of cold water thrown on that. And we just keep coming back to this question that nobody in the current government, despite the change in tone, seems to be talking about oil and gas in the traditional sense.
Yeah, well, so first of all, great choice with Dawn Farrell and also setting up the major projects office in Calgary. And that is obviously a big signal, and people are pleased about it in Calgary. I'm sure they're more pleased about it in Calgary than they are in Ottawa. So important moves and very glad.
Sorry, I hope I said Dawn Farrell and not Dawn Fell. I know a Dawn Fell too, so yeah.
So pleased about that. But again, to your point, no one is asking. So on Trans Mountain in particular, and she will know better than anyone. Here's what I want to say, Pamela. If you were a private proponent and you had a project, would you even want to be on that major projects list? Would you be one of the nation building projects? And it's not all certain that you should want to be on that list, because maybe there'll be some special criteria. Maybe it'll require equity or consent or some kind of standard, one thing we know for sure, everything on that list is going to have a magnifying glass on it and will
Yep.
be a lightning rod for criticism. And for a lot of companies, they would rather fly under the radar and not be on that list. And so with Trans Mountain, I don't even know if it needs to be on the list. It's an expansion. It's really expanding its capacity. It doesn't need another impact assessment.
Right.
That's for sure. So, can we just have an efficient process to allow it, an existing pipeline to increase, the amount that runs through with some compression statements and some dredging, in the harbor and whatnot. And it's probably the dredging in the harbor, is why they would probably want to be on the list or not. But all this is to say that the things that want to be on that nation building list seem to be things that need federal government money.
Yeah.
And that is a very different thing from, can you just fast track my project that I, as a private proponent, have a business case for and have submitted to be approved. And as soon as you approve it, I will start hiring people and I will start investing money in this country. And I don't know, and BC has done, because BC has actually done that. God help them. BC has done something right. In January, they announced their 18 fast track list of projects already in the queue, and they have advanced a lot of those. They have been fast tracked. FIDs were made, shovels are in the ground, people are being hired on a number of those projects. And that seems to me to be a much better approach than inventing a project out of thin air, such as an LNG terminal in Churchill, and funding it with public taxpayer dollars. There are some things we could do that would be free, that would encourage investment and jobs into this country.
And a much faster route to jobs and a positive influence on the economy. Okay, just before we leave it, because I don't want to forget, I want hydrogen that was talked about in the Pivot to Europe conversations. Where are we on that in Canada? What exists? What are we doing with hydrogen?
Yeah, great question. Because we have a paper coming out with MLI, hopefully next week, that my colleague has written, just kind of giving the lay of the land. And so hydrogen is a fuel. It's a molecule that you can store. People think that electricity and gas and electricity is the same thing. No, the difference between a molecule and a fuel and an electron and electricity is very different. And the top one is that you can store one and you can't really store the other.
Right.
And so if we want to get off fossil fuels, there is a fuel that doesn't burn any carbon, and that is hydrogen. And that's why it is appealing from an energy transition point of view. But it's obviously more expensive. Hydrogen doesn't really exist naturally. You actually get it from either cracking water, which would be green. You could use it with electrolysis, take the O out of the H2O, or by removing the carbon from something like natural gas, taking the C out of the CH4. So these are so it's obviously expensive because you have a product and you're having to do something to that product. It's difficult to ship. But the thing is, the government, again, where the leftists are their own worst enemy, where, there is maybe a case for blue hydrogen. You have to pay a premium. Blue hydrogen means that you get it from natural gas. You remove the carbon, right. And then you ship it. And that's how we mostly produce ammonia today. So we already do that. People use it in fertilizer. We already do it. We just don't care if the emissions go into the air. So it's called gray hydrogen, but we know how to do it. But how would you do blue hydrogen is you would capture the carbon. But what the Liberals set their sights on, and to help Atlantic Canada, was to create green hydrogen, was to use their wind, to use electrolysis on water, create hydrogen and ship it over as ammonia across to Europe, to Germany at a huge premium. And obviously this, Germany's not willing to pay it. German industry has been, finally vociferously complaining about the fact that they can't compete. Their manufacturing sector, their petrochemical sector, everything is dying because of the high cost of energy. And now it's natural gas is high. Now you're going to make them do hydrogen. That's even more expensive. They're saying we can't do it. So there's no buyers really in Germany at that scale. And the Canadian green hydrogen was not very competitive anyways. Germany has bought a little bit of green hydrogen that you can get some from within Europe. They got some from Egypt. Atlanticam is not particularly competitive. We haven't seen final investment decisions. What we have seen was very much supported with government subsidies. And this, to the point, It is not helping regions that need economic development. The North, Atlantic Canada, Manitoba, they all need economic development. Obviously, I see that. And those people
Right.
deserve good jobs and deserve economies. It is not helping them to put all their opportunity into things that are not viable on their own, that can only work with government subsidies and simply entrench their dependence. And in the long term, it doesn't work anyways. And Churchill has not worked in the long term, and this green hydrogen is not working in the long term. And all that effort and all that time and all that human capital was misdirected and misallocated. And we should have thought, what are some things that these regions can be competitive in without government subsidies? Because that will be sustainable in the long term.
So carbon capture itself, which we hear a lot about, I mean, that of course needs government support everywhere. I know there are projects in Saskatchewan and other places, but is it just too expensive for what you get out?
I mean, and this is a philosophical question. There is a role for the public sector in some innovation, some tech. The oil sands would never have started up if
Right.
it were not. Canola would never have it's become a juggernaut industry. It
Exactly
started
right.
with
Yeah.
government support. So there's obviously cases where, government needs to come in and help with the R&D and innovation, help scale and get to a commercial rate some of these things. And we need to be smart and strategic. I think carbon capture is one where we could be competitive. I think blue hydrogen is one where we can be competitive. I need to think how much support, but you need to have some private sector buy-in. And this is now, I want people to watch out for this on the nation building projects and some of the projects that are being proposed. How much private sector involvement is there? If these guys are asking for 100% support from the federal government or 90% or even 80% support from the federal government, that should be a huge red flag to everybody.
Yeah.
These need to have a business case behind them, even if you need some government support to get them off the ground or to support it. If it's all government all the time, that is not going to be a good project, in my opinion.
So the carbon capture projects exist in kind of internal operations in small places where you've got an activity going on and you capture the carbon there and you reuse it on site. But as a huge mega project and to encourage export markets, maybe not.
Not today, that's for sure.
Yeah.
The buyers of our oil are primarily the United States and a little bit now with Trans Mountain from China. Are they paying a premium for a lower intensity product? No, they're not. On the other hand, LNG, Canada's LNG is very competitive environmentally. That probably, that probably helps with the long-term deals with some of our Asian partners, with the Germans. It's a great message. If you're looking for, public support for it. So we do definitely want to reduce the emissions intensity of our oil.
Yeah, of course.
Of course we do. And I will trust pathways to determine the best approaches. They are working, the $16 billion carbon capture pipeline is definitely on the expensive end. There may be some lower hanging fruit. And of course, they have reduced by about 30%, in the last couple decades. So they do know how to reduce emissions. But I always want to say this. Emissions in the Canadian oil and gas sector peaked in 2015. We've added 1.5 million barrels of production on top of that, but the absolute emissions peaked in 2015. These guys are producing lower intense natural gas and lower intense oil.
We have to keep saying this all of the time, that the people who work in this industry are the same, or like every other Canadian. They live here, they work here, their kids grow up here. Yes. They intend to do this not only for their bottom line, but for the country that they live in.
Absolutely. So the answer for me, to kind of wrap it up and to bring it back to where you started it, is what can we do? What should we be doing? We should be trying to have a competitive low emissions product, but we should never be trying to displace our own product. And this is absolutely true. If you say we can't do Canadian LNG, we have an emissions cap, we're not allowing it, that means someone with a higher emissions profile is going to be displacing it, replacing it, probably an authoritarian country. This is true of heavy oil also. Canadian heavy oil, yes, is relatively emissions intense. You need heavy oil. Refineries that take heavy oil require heavy oil. They produce particular products from it. If you took out Canadian heavy oil, you would get more Colombian, Mexican, Venezuelan heavy oil, Iraqi heavy oil, and those almost all have a higher emissions intensity profile. So we have to start thinking not about Canada's Paris Agreement
Yeah.
commitments, but where do we fit in global emissions? And I promise you, on almost every commodity, whether it's agriculture, whether it's mineral, whether it's energy, on almost every commodity, Canada's probably in the top 10 or 20 percentile of performers, well above average in almost every commodity. And every time you make it harder to put Canadian product on the market, you make it easier for a higher intense product to come on.
Yeah, that's the thing. We do, however you want to phrase it, we have the cleanest and greenest energy production really up there in the world. And when we don't participate in the global economy, we're letting the Venezuelans and the Russians and the Nigerians take over, which is creating the same
and the
problem.
manufacturing. We did this with all the manufacturing we thought was energy intense, the cement or the mineral processing or the smelting. Now China does it with coal, and now we're stuck in a national security pickle as well.
Right. I read a piece, so just a final word on this about the whole issue of carbon. In the first place, the trees are probably the best way to deal with carbon in the first place. So we could get out there and plant all those billion trees that were promised. But it has also become kind of a thing where governments and corporations can trade credits for carbon, and that's created a whole other market, and that Bill Gates can fly his jet because he buys credits here and there. Is there some of that going on too? People have just found another way to make money around the edges of this.
Well, I mean, of course, it's a bit of a Ponzi scheme. But that said, within Canada, we do have an industrial carbon tax that has been efficient. I will think, industry is not saying in Alberta, get rid of TIER.
Yeah.
But what they will say is, keep it at a cost where we could all be competitive, and also give the money back to us. Don't put it into general revenues, which often should be the same as a consumer tax. If you tax me for carbon, give me back the money so I can put more money into reducing more carbon. Don't just take it as an extra tax on top of every other tax, which is often what happens. Anyway, but because we have these particular provincial carbon markets and the particular provincial schemes, it is very difficult to trade amongst them. And if we do want to keep that route, and in general, the business communities still, if we're going to do anything, that is often the preferred route, because it is efficient and it is market-based. But we need to rationalize our own internal carbon market to make that work. That it is collapsing upon itself, and it needs some reforms.
Okay, that was a little divergent because I wanted to hear you on critical minerals. The world needs it as AI burgeons, and everybody has 6 cell phones, and companies are running on computers, old form and new form. We need critical minerals. We've got them in Canada. China's got them. Is it the same problem of getting them out of the ground that we see with oil and gas, that same mining process? We hear about mining projects that take 15, 18, 20 years to get approved. This is like something we need yesterday.
Yeah. So there's a couple things with critical minerals. One is, yes, but mining tends to be more under provincial jurisdiction. The government has encroached on oil and gas mainly through carbon emissions. And they shouldn't, and they can't, but they have. But it's less clear cut that they can do so on mining, although they often do on water and fish, encroach on provincial jurisdiction. But there's a lot of provinces in this country that are not efficient regulators of mining either, and so you do have a lot of permitting, a lot of approvals, and a lot of things stuck in the process. And we absolutely need to make that more efficient. I think everyone gets that superficially. Whether we've made all the changes we need to do to get permits through faster is still another story, still needs more work to do. But part of it is also market manipulation. And that's where, and this is where it becomes a question. I'm obviously small c conservative, fiscal conservative from MLI, But China is actively manipulating critical minerals markets, and it does make it, when a new rare earth mine in Canada or a new graphite or a new tungsten mine wants to come online, China has predatory behavior where it'll flood the market, make it, make the price drop or buy into that mine, whatever. It has many mechanisms by which to undermine the development of these things in Canada. And we've seen that with Saskatchewan Research Council processing facility. We've seen it with some rare earth mine. We've seen it with quite a few things. And so you do so from a Western government, liberal, democracy, NATO perspective, you do say, well, we need to have security of supply. We can't be dependent on China. They are squeezing right now rare earth supply, and it's hampering our defense supply chain. It's hampering our manufacturing supply chain. What should we do to counter? Is it subsidies? Is it contracts for difference? Is it grants? Is it loans? So far, Canada seems to have taken the equity and grant and loan pathway. It actually just gave just over $6 million to a graphite mine in Quebec. It gave $175 million or $165 million loan through Export Development Canada to a rare earth mine 2 months ago. I think I actually have no opposition to those kinds of moves.
Right. So are we extracting any? Are we contributing to the needs that we're going to have and that our customers are going to have to deal with an AI run world?
So on the critical mineral side, and I want to get to the AI side. On the critical mineral side, there are, 4 very, kind of exquisite world-class smelting processing facilities. One is Teck's facility in Trail, BC. And it takes in a lot of its zinc and copper and processes from there. Vale has a big facility in around the Sudbury area with nickel and all the byproducts there. Rio Tinto with its alumina processing and all the byproducts that you get from there. And then a few other, SRC, rare earths, and some other cobalt, and a few other processing facilities around the country. Anyways, so those are world class. They produce a lot. It's really where the problem is the niche metals. Those have, nickel, zinc, copper, even uranium. We do obviously uranium processing. We're self-sufficient uranium. Those are fairly large global markets, and there's competition. You can trade, and there's derivatives and all those things. Those are mature, sophisticated markets and a global price. It is the small things like rare earths, like gallium, like germanium, where the global market is maybe a couple hundred million, a couple low, single billions. And that there are only 3 or 4 or 5 major producers, and that China has been able to corner that market. And so those are those small niche metals, lightly traded metals, where I think, where we need to step in and Western governments need to provide supply. On the AI.
Yeah, go ahead, go for it.
This is, I'm going to be obsessed with this year for the rest of the year. The biggest capital expenditure outlay right now is in AI and data centers. And I read, and it's just hard to find the right numbers, but I think 180 billion from the Magnificent Seven in the United States in this past year. This is oil sands levels of money. Canada is missing out on this. Why? Number one reason, clean electricity regulations. That these guys require electricity, and it is almost impossible to build electricity here. It is not good enough to get solar and wind because they need what's called 4 nines or 5 nines of reliability, 99.999% reliability. It means they have to be hooked up to the grid, and they can only be offline for 14 seconds, and they won't do behind the meter solar and wind. That is absolutely not good enough for a big AI center. Because of clean electricity regulations, we cannot build natural gas generation facility, which is the fastest thing usually to bring online. Nuclear is, I'm very hopeful about nuclear. We all know it'll be 10 years before you're developing new nuclear behind the meter for AI centers. Maybe hopefully 7 years, but we're still a few years away. And so what's happened is Canada should be competitive in energy for AI. We're talking about shipping natural gas, LNG, to Germany at 10 times the cost that the natural gas is here in Canada, so they can use it for AI. We have a tenth of the cost for input, and it's illegal to build. And so we are missing out. This is the one that we should have our eye on. It's more money than LNG. It's more money than oil. It's more, it is AI data centers is the biggest game in town right now. We could be very competitive, and we're not playing.
Okay. It's just, it's so frustrating because we keep coming to the same last sentence, regardless of what we're discussing here. So with the critical minerals, it's again another timeline, like for the actual critical ones, and everybody understands that they won't have a phone if we have to be dependent on China exclusively for this. Never mind AI generated and run,
Well, the answer is we'll
corporations.
have a Chinese phone. That's how it's gonna. And there's implications for that.
Oh, okay. All right. So you mentioned nuclear. And I was just at a meeting over the summer about this. A lot of enthusiasm about these small reactors that you would be able to take on site to develop a critical mineral or take energy of some form out of the ground. Um, where are we on that? You're talking about 7 years, you said, if we're lucky, 7 to 10 to make these functional?
Well, so the OPG is already in construction, early stages of a construction on their small modular reactor. 300 megawatt G Hitachi has been approved, and that's in their Darlington site, and that should be ready by 2030, 2031.
Yeah,
So that one is on track. That's the first of a kind. They'll probably develop a couple more. If Saskatchewan gets some on-grid nuclear, it'll probably be that one.
right.
Alberta just initiated nuclear consultation this week. So we will have an SMR probably by 2030. But the idea, as you said, that you could get your microreactors or SMRs, put it behind the grid to your AI, your data center, to go to your potash mine, your BHP potash mine, or to do a copper mine in the Yukon, which is of great interest. But again, where those models and that manufacturing supply chain is a couple years behind, and then the regulatory. And so, let's say you had a model and it was approved by the CNSC, then you have to choose your site, you have to do the consultation, you have to get the money. For example, Energy Alberta is looking to do a Monarch, and I think they're talking about mid-30s, mid-2030s. So by the mid-2030s, I expect we'll have some more to get on this AI bus today. That's too late. But that is still enormously promising, and Canada should be and could be in a very good position, to be a first mover on some of those, to develop some of it, to have the uranium supply chain for this. I mean, Cameco's already doing tremendous. Uranium is doing very well right now. So it's a great opportunity. I think we're actually relatively on top of this opportunity. But it's still a couple of years out before it really, smokes up.
Okay. All right. So you mentioned 2030 and 2035. So that twigs my brain to EVs. We've got the mandate for EVs. We're seeing an awful lot of resistance from consumers, from car manufacturers, I was in a car dealership recently, for lack of a better word, the kind of renovations that they have to undergo in their small cities and towns across the country just to display an EV car, where, if you live outside of a warm city, not too practical, because we don't have the infrastructure in place. Seen the huge subsidies for EV battery plants in Ontario, most of which have shut down or moved to the US because Trump has made it very clear. You come and set up your plant here and you'll be spared from tariffs, or you can stay there and hope that the government keeps funding you. But the technology seemed to be out of date in some cases anyway, and we didn't own any of the intellectual property. So another problem. What is going to happen? The government seems intent. I mean, Stephen Guilbeault, who you referenced earlier, is still sitting in cabinet. They seem very intent on keeping to these deadlines of mandatory EV purchasing and use.
So they simply can't. And, auto can do a lot of bad things to the oil and gas sector, and they have, and they do. But because of the way this country's politics and demographics are distributed, they can't kill our auto manufacturing industry. And it is the auto sector that is coming out and saying, this is impossible. You have to get rid of this EV mandate. You're killing us. We already have the Trump tariffs. They're already bleeding
Yeah.
money with the tariffs, with shops threatening to move, with Trump trying to reshore all auto manufacturing. And then you're putting the EV tariffs or the EV mandate on top of them for their own domestic market. And they're saying it's got to be off the table. We cannot continue with this. And we're already seeing where's the highest urban unemployment in this country. It's in Ontario suburbs where they're dependent on steel and aluminum and auto manufacturing. And if they stop using steel and aluminum in the auto manufacturing, that's another problem. This problem is too big, and the solution is too obvious for this mandate to get much further. Now, what I'm watching for is there's so many of these bad climate regulations that had to be rolled back.
Exactly.
So which ones and how are they going? This is I'm sure the $1 million question, Ottawa too. Which ones and how are they going to roll these back? Most Canadians don't want them, but the Liberal base and right now the Liberal cabinet certainly do, or some of them in the cabinet. And so this will be a pickle. And I'm hoping it's not a zero sum. Well, if we get rid of the EV mandate, we have to keep the emissions cap or else we'll get it. I'm hoping that we aren't horse trading which terrible climate policies to get rid of and that there'll be winners and losers. I hope they can do the right thing, be practical like Hodgson was in Berlin, and get rid of all the bad ones that are killing our economy right now.
But it was relatively easy for Carney to say the carbon tax because it becomes such a hot button issue that, he could kind of deal with that. Now, he's collecting the industrial carbon tax part of it didn't go away. So, and with these other clean fuel standards, et cetera, the prices are going to go up. That's another one that we have to deal with. But there's a timing issue now here on EVs, which is getting to be pretty crucial. There is not the infrastructure to meet the actual need if this mandate goes forward.
No, it's an insane, and this is what happens when you start with government top-down mandates. This is why we have 1,000 years of experience with this.
Yeah.
This is very Soviet style. It doesn't work. The market doesn't work. And to your point, because everyone I know that has an EV likes their EV. I've got nothing against EVs, and if people want to buy an EV, please go buy an EV. There is a segment of the population that can have an EV. If you live in Vancouver and Toronto, probably warm enough. Go ahead, go get your EV. If you have a single family home with a garage, now you can install your charger in your garage. If you live in Saskatchewan, pretty much everywhere in Saskatchewan, if you live in an apartment and you don't have a garage, and if you can't afford to buy the EV and to upgrade your entire electrical system up front. So there's just some of us for which an EV is just not a good fit. And to put us all, and to have this Toronto...
It's not a good fit. It's an impossible fit.
It's an impossible fit.
That's
so we're having an electricity crunch. PEI is maybe going to have blackouts in winter because of all the heat pumps that the government bought them. Everyone on my block cannot have an EV.
Okay, I just read that. We'll come back in a minute. PEI is going to spend millions of dollars on 2 fossil fuel powered generators to power the heat pumps that we put in place supposedly to help them in a more efficient way heat their homes. So it's bizarre.
And this is what happens when government centrally plans. You can't account for all the unintended consequences. Right. You can't. It doesn't matter what country, doesn't matter what topic. That is the problem with central planning. And that is why the free market is able to be flexible and adjust and do things incrementally and in an ecosystem. And when the government came in and bought everyone their heat pumps, this should have been predictable. Wow, your electricity demands are going to go up.
Right.
But yet they didn't predict it, which we should do some postmortem on that. Why didn't they foresee that this would be a problem? And now you have the situation, it's the utility asking the regulator to give them permission to build as fast as possible, time-sensitive deal. They get their hands on some gas turbines, which are pretty scarce right now. They can build them by 2028. But guess what? If they have a winter as cold as it was 2 winters ago, PEI will be, very short on megawatts. People now rely on electricity for their home heating. It got down to minus 23 in that polar vortex. And what is plan B? Is it diesel generation? Even before you get the fossil fuel burning natural gas turbines to make up the difference, right. What are we going to do for those 3 years?
All right. So finish up your thoughts on EVs. I'm sorry, that just
Oh,
kind
no
of.
problem. Well, and this is part of the same problem. And if you're increasing demand with EVs and with heat pumps, but has your utility upgraded the distribution site in your
Exactly.
neighborhood? And we know we're not generating enough. We know it's difficult to build transmission, but with just say within my neighborhood, there are limits to how much electricity can go around, and we can't all drive. I can tell you right now in my neighborhood, we can't all have an EV. We can't all upgrade our panels. And it's just like, how do they think this will be resolved? And that's,
Well, I was talking to somebody the other day about this, that they, on their cul-de-sac where they live, there's a limit now. There's only 2 homes that can have EVs in this cul-de-sac because there
yes,
just isn't an electricity source for this. People think just because they plug it into the wall, somehow
yes.
it's free. Not free.
This is the downfall. We have become so lucky and we're so comfortable that we became complacent in Canada, and we
Yeah.
take our energy for granted, and it's been cheap and it's been reliable for as long as most of us can remember. And if there's a blackout, it's news. In a lot of countries, blackout's a daily occurrence. Here,
Yeah.
if it's a blackout, it's news. Um, and we are fast on a track where we can't take it for granted. And I think people are already seeing that, which is why some of the public opinion has turned, which is why some of the pragmatism has come back. But not enough people are not fast enough. We are going to be
Yeah.
out of electricity in this country. We're going to lose out on the AI race. Things are going to get more expensive. I unfortunately fear that things will get worse before they get better.
Yeah, I think you were writing about this the other day, and we can't lose sight of this. You've referenced it a couple of times today. When you have a values driven economy, meaning we're trying to accomplish good social goals and, all of these policies, be they DEI or, green products of, or a green objective, that's a value that you have, but that has to be balanced with your own national self-interest, our own national economy, the well-being of our own citizens. Like there has to be a little bit more balance in there.
Yes. And the word that people have said is, oh, it's a three-legged stool: reliability, affordability, sustainability. They need to act in concert. And I've been saying, no, these are not three equal goals. It is a hierarchy. And affordability and reliability will always come first before sustainability for humans. And it is not me. This is the hierarchy of needs. This is
Yeah.
and if you can focus on climate and sustainability, good for you. You and I are in that position. I could, good for you. It means that all your other material and safety needs have been met. It means that you
Yeah.
have time to focus on these long-term goals because you're eating well enough and you have shelter and you have energy, and you can, you don't have a lot of barriers on your material well-being. Now there's too many Canadians that are at the bottom of the hierarchy that are having to worry about the shelter and the food and the energy and the bills. And if Canadians are feeling that pressure, you can just be sure that, the 7-8 billion other people in this world are feeling it even more. And that is why there's been a recalibration, because a lot of these were luxury beliefs and luxury ideologies. And there's a lot more to human well-being than just, how much CO2 is in the atmosphere.
And the audacity of those of us who have these choices, as you say, of luxury beliefs, expecting the developed and underdeveloped world to just skip through all those phases and, give up cooling and heating their homes or their, where they live because we want to save the environment in our own little minds in Western cultures.
Yeah, well, it was the audacity, but also the blind. It was never going to work simply because
Yeah.
of that. It was never going to work. You should have been able to foresee that people would not trade their energy security and poverty for warming, which I agree is an issue. We don't want to hit 2-degree warming, but 8 billion people having access to sufficient energy, which means sufficient food, is going to be a priority for people over 2 degrees of warming.
That's what the farmers say to me all the time. Do we want to feed ourselves in the world, or, do we want to minimize our already minimal contribution to the world CO2 problem, right? We're actually pretty green as things
Well, yeah,
go.
but I'm glad to say in Saskatchewan that our wheat and our canola and our lentils are pretty much the lowest carbon in the world.
Yeah,
And
you
using
bet.
technology to solve some of these problems, you can use gene editing to allow
Yep.
your crops to absorb more CO2, which actually helps the crops grow bigger. So there are some really great technological solutions where, again, let's focus on those solutions instead of just
Yep.
growing less, let's grow better.
Absolutely. Heather, as always, thank you very much. We didn't touch on every energy source, but I think this is a really
We
good
did pretty good.
primer as we head into this debate about which mega project and why, and whether it makes sense. So we really appreciate all that stuff that's in your brain just come tumbling out for us. It really helps. Heather Exner-Pirot, she's a senior fellow of senior fellow and director of Energy, Natural Resources, the Environment at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, and a special advisor to the Business Council of Canada. Also, and you referenced this, a research advisor to the Indigenous Resource Network and a senior fellow at Arctic 360. You are trying to deal with the 360 picture here and 380. We appreciate it. All right. Talk very soon. Thanks so much.
Great to be here.
Great. And thanks to all of you for listening in today. We hope that that's helpful in understanding the debates that we're going to be seeing coming out of Ottawa over the next several months. That's it for this edition of No Nonsense. We'll see you again very soon.